Olá, Eva, você pode entrar no outro link lá, vai ser melhor para você.
Oh, wait a minute. Is that Denise?
That's Denise, yes.
Well, that's marvelous. Why don't you shove Jacques out of the way?
Exactly. She always does. So, well, we're gonna do Havdalah first, so and then we don't want to waste Bill's time. It's very valuable. He already wasted plenty of time this afternoon with me, and yeah. So if you happen to have Temple Israel's prayer book,
yes,
we will have a new light there.
Is it in the prayer book? I looked.
It's on the prayer book on page 414. Then he's going to hold the candle so how the people can see it. Don't burn me, if at all possible. No. Give me away. Wow, we're on page 414, fellow Israelites. I know where else everybody is. But our ancestors took words from Scripture to voice their thanks to God, who sustains us from week to week. Within their ancient words of praise, we find prayers for life and health in the week to come. May their faith be ours as well, as we make their prayers our own. הנה לישועתי יפתח ולא יפחד, כי עזיבה זמרתיה, והיא לי לישועה, ושפתם מים בששון ממעייני הישועה, אדוני ישועה, למך ברכתך סלע, אדוני צבאות עמנו משגב לנו אלוהי יעקב סלע, אדוני צבאות אשרי עם פותח בך, אדוני יושיע מלך יעננו ויום קוראנו, ליהודים הייתה אורה ושמחה וששון ועיקר, כן תהיה לנו כוס ישועות אשא, ובשם אדוני אקרא. Behold, God is my helper, trusting the eternal God, I'm not afraid, for the eternal one is my strength and has become my guiding presence. With joy we draw water from the wells of salvation. The eternal one brings deliverance and blessing to the people. The God of hosts of heaven is with us. The God of Jacob is our stronghold. How blessed is the one who trusts in you. Be with us, eternal one. Answer us when we call upon you. Give us light and joy, gladness and honor, as in the happiest of days of our people's past. Then shall we lift up the cup to rejoice in your guidance and call out to your praise. Kiddush gladdens our hearts. In this gladness, we look beyond the ugliness and misery that deface our world. May our eyes always be open to unnoticed beauty and blessings, yet to be recognized. May we be ever mindful of our promise to help repair the brokenness of our world. Now, okay, then I leave the Kiddush cup. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. We praise eternal God, creator of the universe, who creates the fruit of the vine. And we have Besamim here, Besamim right here, and we. But the added soul that Shabbat is said to confer is leaving us now. The fragrance of these spices lift our spirits at the moment of its departing. It reminds us that the next 6 days also will pass and Shabbat will return. The bouquet makes us yearn with thankful hearts for the sweetness of rest, the fragrance of growing things. We are grateful for the dream of a world healed from pain, pure and whole, as on the first Shabbat when God rested from the work of having made our world. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei minei besamim. Smell. Make sure people see you're smelling good. Then we have now Shabbat now departs, and the workday begins as we behold the flame, that flame there. Behold the flame. The candle's double wick reminds us that all qualities are paired. We have the power to create many different fires, some useful, others harmful. They will never use our powers to do harm to our world. May the fires we kindle be holy ones, that we may bring light and warmth to all humanity. Then you look at the candle and you try to see the light reflected in your nails. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei meorei ha'esh. We praise eternal God, creator of the universe, creator of light. And then hang it there. Try not to burn the house in this process. Good. So far, so good. people on the internet get to see this as well. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, המבדיל בין קודש לחול, בין אור לחושך, ביום השביעי לששת ימי המעשה. ברוך אתה אדוני, המבדיל בין קודש לחול. We praise you, eternal God, creator of the universe. You enable us to distinguish the commonplace from the sacred. You create light and darkness, the seventh day of rest and the 6 days of labor. We praise you, God, who calls us to separate the ordinary from the sacred. Thank you, God, for the day of Shabbat that now concludes, for the blessings of peace and joy, bodily rest and spiritual refreshment. We are thankful. May Shabbat's influence accompany us into the new week, sanctifying all our activities and inspiring us to work with spirits renewed. May the day come when harmony and peace shall be embraced by all people. Try to get my wife drunk as well. And then
Mavdil ben Kodesh.
Amavdil ben Kodesh. Oh, you won't be able to see. Wait, I'm gonna do this so you guys get to see. I know how. It is gonna hold. So it's probably doing this on the internet like this. Amavdil ben Kodesh lechol hatoteinu imkol zareinu vekenu yarbe yarbe kachol kekochavim balayla shavua tov. Shavua tov. No. Shavua tov. Shavua tov. And then hang there. So Francis Eliyahu Hanavi. Eliyahu Hanavi. Eliyahu Hatishbi. Eliyahu Agiladi. Imera beyameinu yavo eleinu. Mashiach ben David, Mashiach ben David. Now, Shavua Tov, Shavua Tov, Shavua Tov, Shavua Tov. A good week, a week of peace. Make bedrest rain and joy increase. That's it. That's Havdalah for you guys.
You forgot only one thing. V'shaftem mayim b'sason b'manei Yeshua. V'shaftem mayim b'sason b'manei Yeshua. Hey, 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 hey.
Mayim b'sason.
Etc.
I finish it. And everybody else here. This is John Scheinman, president of Temple of One Trust. So. Okay, good. And then now, without further ado, and I'm glad we have at least some people. This is actually quite a nifty idea as you think about it, because you can get lots of people here, can get John, everyone. Bill doesn't have to suffer that much. He gets to be with us, but not that much involvement. So I'll let him talk now about his wonderful book that I read even. It shows how great it is. Go ahead, Bill.
I appreciate that he comes here to take credit for it, because this afternoon I was very late and I only read 5 chapters, but I would have read more, except I was crying too much. So
Bill is a very, very dear friend of mine. We co-wrote, actually he wrote the book. I just criticized him mercilessly and gave him a hard time. A book about non-Jews who risk their lives to help and hide Jews during the Shoah. And exactly when we were doing that, it happened 9/11. So I lived many of those events related in the book with him, because he was going through that, and I think to some degree, I guess, was therapeutic for him to be just dealing with simple things like the Holocaust, but again, he was a famous faith writer for the Kansas City Star, the time the Kansas City Star used to be a real newspaper where they didn't just plug everything from the outside, but the ads. And he has written many, many books. He'll tell you all about this. And specifically, he'll tell you about, his nephew. He was very, very close to Carlton, who was one of the victims of the plane. I think it was the first plane, the plane that hit the World Trade Center. Bill, do you have anything else to add, or you're done? Have I said everything?
Just gave my talk, so that's good.
Good.
Well, greetings, friends, and really thanks for your interest in my new book, which your rabbi does not serve as a co-author, as he did with our They Were Just People book. However, I did ask him to give a read to an early draft of this new book, and he made a couple of good suggestions. Now, if there were an acknowledgement page in the book, I would have listed his name, but there isn't. So this is your acknowledgement, Jacques. Mazel tov.
Thank you. I should have taped it. Well, luckily I did.
I would like to tell you a bit about the new book. It's called Love, Loss, and Endurance, a 9/11 story of resilience and hope in an age of anxiety. But mostly I'd like to respond to your questions and comments about it or whatever else is on your mind, whether you've had a chance to read the book or not. And John, I'm glad you're into it. By the way, you can get a copy of the book from Amazon in hardback, paperback, or e-version. But if you want an autographed copy, just email me and I can tell you how we can arrange that. My autograph in the book will reduce the value of the book by about 84 cents, but you can live with that. The book, of course, is about the murder of my nephew, Carlton Fife, on 9/11. As Jacques mentioned, he was a passenger on the first plane to strike the World Trade Center. But the book goes beyond that painful personal story to explore the question of what leads some people to buy into extremist ideas that can lead to violence. One of the questions I raise in the book is the obvious one. Why did Carlton die? He died because 19 hijackers bought into the wildly bogus ideas that Osama bin Laden had taught them, which included the delusion that God wanted them to murder people to punish the United States for a series of alleged sins. Bin Laden and his followers claimed to be Muslims, but their curdled theology had twisted Islam beyond recognition in much the same way that the Ku Klux Klan and today's current batch of white Christian nationalists bend Christianity into an unrecognizable mess. So that too is what I write about in this new book. Through a series of short interludes, as well as a longer chapter on the theological and other roots of extremism, I point to case after case of rigid, magical thinking that has led to violence, from the Holocaust to the murders of Black people at Mother Emanuel Church in South Carolina, to the murders of the son and father of my friend Mindy Corcoran and the wife of my friend Jim Lamano by a neo-Nazi here in the Kansas City area in 2014, a man who was out to try to kill Jews, but who wound up killing 3 Christians. Mindy, by the way, has written the afterword for my book, and the Reverend Adam Hamilton, the founding pastor of the United Methodist Church of the Resurrection in Leawood, has written the foreword. In addition, one of this country's best known and wisest Muslims, Ibu Patel, founder of the Interfaith Youth Corps, has written an endorsement blurb for the book that you will find on the book's back cover. Now, I, of course, had no idea that when we set January 19th as a publication date for this book, it would be less than 2 weeks after Trump-inspired extremists would engage in insurrection at our nation's capital. The rioters, we now know, included followers of the QAnon conspiracy theorists, the white nationalist hate group known as the Proud Boys, members of other radical hate groups, and white supremacists carrying Confederate flags. I must tell you that I do not, frankly, see much difference between the Capitol Hill rioters and the 9/11 hijackers. Both groups bought into lies, whether political or theological, that wound up costing people their lives. In the book's last chapter, I try to suggest various approaches that you and I can adopt to try to stand against such extremism. And I hope readers will spend some time thinking about those approaches and what might work for them. If after reading that chapter, you have other suggestions, please let me know. we may produce a short study guide for this book that would include those kinds of ideas. One of the ideas for opposing extremism that I list in the book is to become more religiously literate, starting with your own faith tradition, but moving beyond that to traditions other than your own. That will require engaging in interfaith dialogue of some kind. And one of the tools through which you can do that here in Kansas City, as many of you know, is the Greater Kansas City Interfaith Council. I also suggest that people spend time with other people who are experiencing some kind of deep grief. As I note in the book, that can open our eyes to the countless ways that death, particularly unexpected, violent death, can affect almost every aspect of the lives of survivors and make us more eager than ever to work for peace. Well, this is my 7th book, including 2 that had co-authors. Each book provided a different writing experience from the one before or after it. Our book about Polish rescuers in the Holocaust took Jacques and me about 4.5 years to write. Other books took much less time for various reasons. This new book took me, in a sense, almost 20 years to write, which is to say that I've been saving emails, letters, notes, blogs, and columns on the subject since 9/11 happened. Not sure what I'd eventually do with all of those files. In the end, I decided that I was obligated to tell this story, in part because I'm one of the few professional journalists whose family was directly affected by 9/11. I know of only one other, and that's Mike Casey, and Mike worked at the Star at the time also. One of Mike's cousins died that day in the Pentagon. Not everyone in my extended family wanted me to write this book. Carlton's parents, his widow, and one of his sisters gave me either permission or encouragement or both. But one of his sisters didn't want it written, partly because she didn't want to deal with the media again, and partly because she believed I would simply profit off her brother's death. So that was one more complication that the terrorists threw at our family. Before I turn to your comments and questions, I would like to read just a part of a chapter that I hope will give you a small sense of the kind of person my family lost when Carlton died. As I do this, please think not just about my family, but also the almost 3,000 other families who were devastated by death that malevolent day, and the thousands and thousands of other families who have gone through this kind of trauma because of other terrorist attacks, some of them faith-based, around the world since then, including the January 6th loss of life at our Capitol building. But the short passage I'm going to read is from late in the book, and it talks about some memories of Carlton that our family shared. It says this: on the 10th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks in 2011, Barb and Jim, that's my sister and her husband, Carlton's parents, Barb and Jim sent out a note to their extended family asking members to share, quote, your cutest or any memory of Carlton. So again, we were drawing on reminiscences, on those flashes of minutes or even seconds that fight their way to the top of our mental storage units and compete for attention as a way to keep alive something about someone who isn't alive anymore. It's a distillation process, important, yes, but also shadowy, incomplete, even perhaps at times misleading. And yet on that 10th anniversary, that's what Carlton's parents bid us do, and we were all in. One of the more revealing memories of who Carlton was at his core in that sharing came from his cousin Amanda, daughter of my sister Mary. Here's what Amanda wrote. One time when we were all at the Woodstock house, Woodstock is Woodstock, Illinois, my hometown, and that's where my parents lived long after I left the nest. Anyway, Amanda says that they were all at the Woodstock house for a holiday. We decided it would be a good idea to play Monopoly. I think I was probably about 8, Amanda says, and Carlton was 12. The other players were Erin, who is one of Carlton's sisters, as well as Kate and Lisa, my 2 daughters. At least an hour, maybe more into the game, I was...
Realmente este punto de vista y tú eres la mamá y haces lo que quieres.
Well, Fred, let me mute him. I'm sorry, guys.
That's right. At least an hour, maybe more into the game, I was losing badly, Amanda says. In what was to be my first ever blatant attempt at cheating, I stole a couple of hotels from Erin's property and hid them. She didn't see me do it, but Carlton sure did. When Erin finally noticed part of her empire was missing, Uncle Jim, who was her partner, asked who took them and where they were. Silence. When the line of questioning came my way, I full out blamed it on Carlton. I remember I actually said I saw him take the hotels, even though I knew full well that he spotted me taking the hotels. Uncle Jim immediately took him upstairs for a loud talk, and I could hear Carlton very upset. I remember sitting on Grandpa's old green chair, riddled with guilt. Yet I was clearly too deep into the lie to come clean, at least in the mind of an 8-year-old. After a good amount of time had passed, Carlton appeared in the living room with very red eyes. He looked right at us and clear as day said, "I am sorry for cheating." He then went back upstairs and went to bed. He never threw me under the bus. And for a 12-year-old boy, I find that amazingly protective and brave. He took my punishment, and I'm pretty sure he never held a grudge because he acted normal the next day to me, which I remember as strange because I was so ashamed I could barely look at him. Anyway, as we got older and fantastically sarcastic, I always asked Carlton if he wanted to play Monopoly. And he always said, "With you, shit, no." And by the way, Amanda says, I think I never came clean to Jim about the fact that it was me cheating. I know I'm in for it now. Well, it turned out that Mandy wasn't in for it at all because Jim replied this, "Holy crap, I have not a single memory of that incident. Who the hell was I, the enforcer or something? Did I break his kneecaps too?" To which Amanda replied, "Phew, glad you don't remember. I've been sweating this one out for 30 years. Well, that young kid, Carlton, with a protective moral center, grew into a profoundly moral adult with a marvelous sense of humor, captured in a memory that my daughter Lisa shared in response to that year's request for memories. Lisa said this, "I was picking him up from the airport. I don't recall why, and he had been on a job interview recently. It must have been right after college or something. I asked him how the interview went, and he said he thought it had gone well. And then he added, I know I left an impression. I wasn't wearing any pants." Well, that's probably a good place to stop, except to add that I still miss Carlton and his, including his completely random emails to me that always seemed to arrive when I needed a lift. One message that I got more than once simply said this, "Hey, did I ever tell you how tall and handsome I am?" That was it. He was both tall and handsome. I'm 6'3.5", and Carlton ended up 6'5". So I looked up to him in more ways than one. But now let's get to your questions and comments, including your own ideas for standing against extremism. Thanks.
You guys can unmute yourselves if you so choose, especially if you have something to say.
You know, I think many of us remember 9/11 so well. I was in North Carolina at the time, and there was a lot of North Carolina in your book, Bill. But I remember, the thing I remember most is that by 4 o'clock that afternoon, First Presbyterian had arranged and Judea Reform had arranged to invite the imam to come for a special service at First Pres.
Mhm.
And all three communities came together, and it was really cathartic.
What had gone on that allowed that to happen that quickly? What connections did the three congregations have before that?
Well, Judea Reform and First Pres had an ongoing relationship for probably 20 years at that time. The Presbyterian kids did bar and bat mitzvah classes with the Jewish kids, and the Jewish kids did confirmation classes with the Presbyterian kids. And there was a lot of conversation, going back and forth. And Durham is, as you probably know, is a very activist city. It has a very prominent African-American middle class that's very, very powerful. So some of the African-American churches in Judea Reform and First Pres had been very active in civil rights and economic justice and other issues for a lot of time. And this was just a natural. I don't think that the Muslim community had been so involved with that and had perhaps not felt included. And this was I think this started a process of intentional inclusion that had been absent before.
Good. One of the ideas in the back of my book about beating back extremism, in a sense, is to become religiously literate and also to engage in interfaith work. The one thing it does is it causes you to look at your own faith tradition self-critically and to know more about your tradition so that you can explain it to others. I've served on the board for a number of years of the Kansas City Interfaith Youth Alliance, and we discovered that high school kids who became active in it, nobody converted to a different faith tradition. What they did was to realize that they were not fully able to explain their own religion very well. And it caused them to go back and study it deeper, and thus to be able to be advocates for it and to be explainers of it to others. So, yeah, that's helpful. Who else would like to throw one my way?
Bill, I want to ask you a question because I've talked about this with a friend of yours who's an Episcopal priest and a friend of Jacques. He referred me to him for getting some guidance on how to do remote services. But we were talking a bit about this difficulty of understanding people who get caught up in conspiracy theories, which really is, in fact, I think you say, the basis of the distortion of religion as well. Things that can, and his suggestion to me, and I want your opinion of it, is that the people who are very susceptible to untruths and conspiracies because of their difficulty dealing with the complexity of truth. That if you want to get a pretty good understanding of things, going at the truth is sort of painful because there's a lot of ifs, ands, and buts, and certainly flippantly going to whataboutism is a stupid idea because it means everything is the same. But nevertheless, it's one of those tools that are used by people who can't handle complexity. Mm-hmm. And So it may be that part of the society, because for me, it's a problem, because some people that I know and I like very much are seriously into conspiracy theories and fictions and things that I don't understand where it's from. And it seems to me that they're using this as a way to, if you give somebody a simple project and with no questions about it, it's much more comfortable than the complexity of what is the truth. But I don't know. It's something that I don't know how to approach these friends and to understand where they're coming from.
It's a problem a lot of us have, not only among friends, but even some family. I have a couple of thoughts about this, John. One is that we need to start young. We need to start with our children and grandchildren. We need to teach them well. And we need to encourage them to ask the hard questions of faith. And all of us need to be able to ask the hard questions of religion in a community so that we don't settle for the easy answers. Life is full of ambiguity and it's full of mystery. And when we settle for one-dimensional answers, we shortchange ourselves and we shortchange others. So help, first of all, being a part of a faith community that allows you to ask the difficult questions of faith and not to shy away from that, and to push your rabbi and for me to push my pastor about things is a very helpful thing to be able to do. When people go it alone, they can often run off into anarchistic streets mentally and philosophically. The other thing I would suggest is that I've just finished reading a book I mentioned to Jacques this afternoon. It's by a female rabbi named Rachel Mikva, who is connected to Chicago Theological Seminary. And she's written a book called Dangerous Religious Ideas. And her contention is that every single religious idea can be dangerous. And we need to be willing to explore those ideas and be very self-critical about what we believe and how we believe it, which leads me to my suggestion for how to begin to respond to people who are in the situation that you described, John, as being locked into conspiracy theories and crazy political ideas. And that is simply if you're in conversation with them, you don't immediately denounce them. You don't immediately tell them they're crazy. What you do, I think, is to say to them, help me understand how you came to that conclusion. And that when they then give you an answer, you have another place to go. You can say, well, you need to tell me more about that because what I've read and what I understand contradicts that. So tell me more. And to continue being in conversation in that way, first of all, it respects their core humanity, which we can't give away. And secondly, it requires them to have thought through where they came up with these bozo ideas, which you never say to them, this is a bozo idea. But you explore that in that way. I've found that helpful to some extent, but in the end, you cannot reason with irrationality. And when you recognize that that's finally what you are up against, sometimes you just have to walk away.
That's why Bill kicked me out of his house this afternoon.
Well, one of the problems about that conversation is, and we saw this over the last 4 years, the co-opting of the posture of victimhood.
Yeah.
In other words, the person spreading the conspiracy theories, etc., is also taking upon themselves a victimhood, that nobody gives me enough respect, nobody treats me right, they're persecuting me, and it's you realize what a tricky business that is. And I took a link from your book, and that's why I didn't get to chapter 5 today, because you referred to the history of Christianity and anti-Semitism, and you referred to a marvelous text that went on, it seemed, for decades. I mean, it was a very, very long thing that I found spellbinding, because here we are, the Jews who are always claiming to be persecuted, and of course we were, but then watching people who are not claim the mantle of victimhood as if that makes correct their bozo ideas.
Yeah.
Because nobody will accept me for what I believe. And I thought that was marvelous. When I read through that, I was thinking, oh my gosh, this is maintaining our Jewish victimhood. But in fact, that posture of victimhood it has been so distorted, I think. That's one of the points.
Well, and victimhood comes and goes in a sense. About maybe 20 years ago or so, I was at a conference in Washington, D.C. That was addressed by a guy who was head of the Reform, came out of the Jewish Reform tradition, and he was a head of a group that was politically active. I can't think of the name of the
Religious
group.
Action Center.
Yeah, that's right, Religious Action Center. And he said at that time, he said, most American Jews today would be hard pressed to come up with a recent example of direct anti-Semitism to them. Well, if that was true then, and I was a little surprised that he said it then, but if that was true then, it surely is not true today. And we certainly has not been true in the last 4 years. So I think one of the things that we need to have at hand when we are dealing with people and conspiracy theorists and this kind of stuff is access to factual information. You may remember during the most recent impeachment proceedings, Mitt Romney was asked, what can you say to people who believe all this nonsense? And Romney said, tell them the truth. That's what we have to do. We just have to tell them the truth. Now, that's kind of an easy answer, but it is true that there are provable truths. And those are things that we have to defend, seems to me.
Thank you.
I had, it's not related to the sense of your book, but back in 2001, I really thought that the attacks on us by on 9/11 would have brought Americans together.
Well, it did for several minutes.
Yeah. Why? I mean,
this is going afield from the discussion of yours, but I never understood why.
Because Pearl Harbor brought Americans together. So what was the difference?
I think by 2001, we had entered a period of increasingly strident political division and social division. I would, where did this really begin? Well, you go back as far as you want, but I tend to look at the beginning of this with the rise of Newt Gingrich, with the rise of Rush Limbaugh, may he rest in peace, with the rise of voices that were finding political and media success in stirring up people's hatreds and anger. They were finding an audience and they were getting paid for it. And by the time the 9/11 terrorist attacks happened, there was this, you remember, I mean, I said a few hours, but literally for a few weeks, we had flags all over my neighborhood. We were together, it seemed like, as a people. President Bush seemed to be striking the right notes about what Islam was and what it is, and not to blame all Muslims for this. But it didn't take very long for us to return to the social nastiness that has become what America is today. And the other night I was listening to Isabel Wilkerson. Casey Public Library had her in on Zoom as a speaker. And she's the author of the book Caste and the book The Warmth of Other Suns. And she believes that that we need a Truth and Reconciliation Commission racially for the United States to really understand our own history. And part of the issue is that a lot of Americans don't know our own history. A lot of Americans, for instance, don't know that it was not until 1965 that we truly became a democracy with the adoption of the Voting Rights Act. Before then, most Black people were shut out of the electoral process. In 1920, we allowed women to vote, and that was a great step forward. But hardly any Black women were able to vote until for another 45 years. And to say that is to say that we have changed as a nation in my own lifetime. 1965. At the time, you had to be 21 years old to vote, and I didn't turn 21 until the next year. So I was about voter age when this nation finally became a democracy. That's American history, and a lot of us don't know it or express it in that way. And I think to be able to grasp that is to be able to argue about in some respectable, wise way about the path forward.
One of the things that, Fred raised the Pearl Harbor and the difference, and you also mentioned that for a few minutes at least, George W. Tried to reunite the country, but in fact, the persistent attempt to unite the country was what we had. We had leadership in World War II, and we had anti-leadership that took over George W. In 2001, 2, 3. Basically, he was managed brilliantly by the father of the current Republican renegade, Liz Cheney, and several others who in fact realized that they could make use of this national tragedy to focus our attention on hatred and then to war, which was a construct. So I think that's the biggest difference from Pearl Harbor.
Well, the other thing to remember about Pearl Harbor is that what happened as a result of that in the United States, I'm talking about. What happened was that FDR, who did a lot of wonderful things, approved in putting Japanese Americans, many of whom fought for us in uniform,
Right, yeah.
into internment camps. And
That's right.
in one of those camps, my younger sister's husband was born in Arizona. And I will tell you, that his name is Gary Watanabe. And I will tell you that within Gary, there is some kind of, I mean, he's a wonderful guy, and he's been a great husband to my sister and a great father to my niece and nephew. But deep within that man, there is a core coldness of anger because of where he was born and why he was born there. And that's what we do to people when we act in that way. And it's important to know that history so that we don't do that again. That chapter in our history just cannot be washed away and wiped off the map.
Thank you. Thank you for reminding me.
And your point about history is very well taken, and it's been backed up down the years. Harry Truman was not the first person to say this, but he was prominent in saying that the people who do not learn the lessons of history are doomed to repeat its mistakes.
Mm-hmm. And interesting, Harry himself was one who was open enough to learn. When I was at the Star, and right after Bess Truman died in 1982, and I was able to cover her funeral, and then we got access to what was discovered in the Truman home, which was 1,300 letters written from Harry to Bess from the time that he was on the farm out in Grandview through his time at the White House. And I made it a project to read them all and to write about kind of the character development of Harry Truman. And what I discovered was early in his career as a young farmer out in Grandview, he was a deeply racist man. He would use the N-word frequently in his notes. He had no use for Black people. But who was it eventually who integrated the armed services? It was Harry
Truman.
Who was it who stood against Strom Thurmond and the Dixiecrats? It was
Harry Truman.
So the capacity for growth is one that we need to somehow figure out how to instill into people, to be critical enough to not just challenge others, but challenge ourselves about this stuff. Joyce, you always have good questions for me. Anything on your mind?
Joyce, you're muted, Joyce.
Yeah, I'm just listening and taking it all in. I haven't had a chance to read your book yet, but I'm looking forward to getting a copy from you.
All right. Yeah, by the way, as I said earlier, if you want a copy from me, just email me. My email is easy to find. Ask Jacques if you can't.
Hey, just go to his house. You live almost next door to him.
Yeah, we are pretty close.
Joyce is the one who lives the closest to you. Cesar is the one farthest.
Yeah.
I already got my copy on Kindle.
See, I told you get some international sales.
Cesar, where are you?
In Zacatecas, Mexico.
Okay, good. Well,
Has your book have you been translated into other languages or just English so far?
not this
He
book.
can barely speak English. What are you talking about?
The book Jacques and I wrote is in a couple of different languages, so
Portuguese, Spanish, profanity.
and English.
Yeah, he's got it.
Oh, there it is. Yeah,
Enséñale.
yeah. Thank you. Yeah. No, I don't know what prospects there might be for having this translated, but I'm just trying to get it out in English first and see where it goes. So.
Bill, the niece that was not in favor of you writing this, has she had a chance to read? Has she read it? And what does she think now?
The only response, I mailed her a copy and I said, Tiffany, this is the book you didn't want me to write. I hope you will note that it does its best to honor your brother. And I hope you will recognize that I felt obligated to write this. And in one email that went to a family group, she said, I asked him not to write it and he wrote it anyway. He shouldn't have written it. So she has not come around on the issue. She and I have never been all that close. Certainly not anywhere near as close as Carlton and I were, for no obvious reason. But I regret that she feels that way. But
Do you think she actually has read your book?
I don't know. I hope so. I've decided for the moment not to stir that question. If she wants to respond to me, she knows how to find me. And her kids know me and know how to find me. And so we'll see.
Bill, when did you know you were going to write the book, and how did writing the book help you grieve?
It was only when about a year ago, or a little more than a year ago, that I began thinking about the 20th anniversary of 9/11 coming up this year. And I thought to myself, you know, Timaeus, you are in a unique position to be able to help readers understand this story in a personal way, because of my professional background. And so I've got back behind me in my drawers back here, I have file after file after file of email, printed off emails and so on, saved, columns and blogs that I've over the years have written about Carlton and about 9/11 and about bin Laden. And I sat down and I decided, first of all, I would make sure they were in chronological order. And that took a little doing, but they were pretty much there. And then I went through to read them for meaning and for whether there's a story here that had to be told. And it was then that I said to myself, I really don't have a choice about this. I just have to do this. So it was a little over maybe a year and a half ago. It was probably in mid-2019, or a little before that, perhaps. So, yeah, now Marcia and I are thinking of we're going to put this house on the market this spring and move to an apartment not far away. And now the question is, what do I do with all these files? And what do I do? I've been clearing off the bookshelf. There's nowhere near what used to be on those shelves as of a few months ago, but that's a hard job too. Don't ask me to help you with that when you downsize.
You know, what you just said about it was your sister who didn't want you to write it?
No, it was her daughter,
Her daughter,
niece,
yeah.
Carlton's sister.
I cannot believe for the life of me that if she does read it, she can possibly object to that. It's having been written, no matter how much a person wants to stay private, when they see the positive effects of the lesson learned from the private. I mean, that's actually what makes lessons work.
Yeah.
It has to come from the private. It can't come from the public. I mean, yes, we can yell and scream and carry on about public events that we see, but they don't register unless we take them in to be private.
Yeah.
And so that, I can't believe it.
I hope you're right about that reaction, John. I don't know. Tiffany has had something of a strained relationship with her own mother at times, and is not an easy woman to understand in some ways. But she's my niece. I love her, and we'll just see where this goes.
Yeah.
Rabbi, do you want to wrap this up, or do you want
I just want to thank you. I have asked you more questions about this book and this topic than anybody on earth. I congratulate you for very skillfully avoiding mentioning the nun. That's not a proud event in our history.
All right, I'm going to tell this story. Jacques and I were on a trip to New York to work on the book that we did together. And as part of that, anytime I'm in New York, I go to Ground Zero. So he and I went down to Ground Zero. And at the time, the museum wasn't open yet. It was all under construction and deconstruction. And there were signs there saying no public solicitation for anything. And I ran across, while we were there, a woman dressed as a nun.
Looks more like a transvestite dress, like kind of, because really huge.
Yeah, well, whatever. It struck me she was as fake as it's possible to be. One time, my first wife and I dressed up as nuns to go to a Halloween party. And so that's what she looked like to me. There was a reason for that, and it was all fine. But anyway, she was off trying to get contributions for something. She had her tin cup or bucket.
Saint Joseph something, I remember.
Yeah. And I said, damn, here's the sign says you're not supposed to be doing that. And I was really upset, and Jacques pretty much had to hold me back from going and smacking her. I probably wouldn't.
He wanted to smack me, so I had to help him as well. It was something.
So that's the nun, and may she rest in peace.
And I have tortured Bill ever since with that story because Bill is the nicest guy in the world. He does have some flaws. The one I'm willing to talk about right now is his fondness for this childish candy. What's the candy you like? I gave you a whole pound one of that.
What do you mean childish? Snickers is a gift from God.
Snickers, yes, childish candy. So but I think he's an overall wonderful human being. And besides the fondness for childish candy and hanging out with me, the only other time I saw him even closely doing something reprehensible was his desire to smack the nun in the face. So, but anyway, we thank you, Bill. Bill, by the way, you should know, is an honorary member of Temple Israel. He paid $1, and I think he overpaid for the membership, but we appreciate him very much.
And when I buy books on Amazon, I buy them through smile.amazon.com, and TI is the only charity to which my 3 or 4 cents a year goes.
Appreciate it very much. Plus, I'm always a beneficiary of Bill's Jewish books, which I have some for John, by the way. I got them this afternoon. We always thank you and appreciate Bill more than we can say. Now, without a joke, he's truly a blessing for all of us. We're thrilled to know him. And again, thank you, Bill. Come back anytime.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Great to be with you.
Okay,
Thank
now
you very
Bill,
much.
Bill can leave and we can say bad things about him.
Good to see you, Bill.
Thanks, John. You all take care.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye, guys.
Bye.
We'll wrap.
Shabbat tov.
Bye. Bye. Shavuot Tov. Come back anytime. Everybody can go home but Denise. Denise should stay here. She's upstairs.
She's trapped. She's trapped in a hell of her own making.
Yeah, I'm upstairs. She's
I have some
downstairs.
books. I have some books for you. I have some books for you from Bill. Okay. This was terrific. It's taped, so maybe we can put it on. I'm sure Bill won't mind. I'll check with him. We can put it later on the web page, or we can put it on the newsletter. It's too bad more people didn't come, but it's the first time. You know, even Summer didn't show up. I mean, she would be interested in knowing what's the format. Maybe she was busy.
Well, that's all right. She'll find out next month,
Yes.
March 13th.
And I'll talk to her. I'll talk to her in advance.
Yeah. And everything will be recorded. Thank you very much, Rabbi. Thanks for doing this again. And thanks for those of you who come. And we're looking for more and more opportunities for education.
Just the one thing is, I have no idea. I would definitely like to have feedback. Is the Havdalah okay? Good enough? I mean, I try to keep it sweet, short, sweet to the point. You know, I mean, don't know how to.
Well, you started with an all-star.
Well, no, but I want to make sure that the Havdalah, the actual Havdalah, no, me drinking the wine, the candles, but that was okay. Try to keep it short, sweet, straight to the point. You know, make it reform. Okay.
Thank you.
Have a good one. Bye.
Thank you.